Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. We are diving straight in today because we're looking at a deeply complex, honestly kind of mind-bending structural paradox right at the crossroads of federal procurement, indigenous sovereignty, and migrant surveillance. You know, in the massive behind-the-scenes machinery of the federal government, the stuff funded by our tax dollars, laws that were originally built to fix historical injustices sometimes collide with modern security operations in ways nobody really saw coming. And that specific collision, that's exactly what we're mapping out today.
Let's kick things off with a pretty staggering number, $63 million. That is the price tag of a Department of Homeland Security contract that was awarded to a company called Coniag Services, Inc. Now, Coniag Services isn't just your run-of-the-mill defense contractor. It's actually a subsidiary of Coniag, Inc., which is one of Alaska's premier Alaska Native corporations.
So, what exactly does $63 million buy? Well, this huge award tasks an Indigenous-owned corporation with setting up and running the 287G National Coordination Center down in Nashville, Tennessee. At this facility, they basically run the data systems and intelligence operations. And their explicit job? Assisting federal agents, local cops, and partner agencies in locating and tracking unaccompanied migrant children.
Which brings us to a really profound, almost jarring question, right? How exactly did laws designed to empower a historically dispossessed group end up creating the surveillance infrastructure targeting another highly vulnerable population? I mean, how on earth do these two completely separate legal and human universes even intersect?
To figure that out, here is our roadmap for today. First, the statutory advantage. Then, tracking unaccompanied minors. After that, the structural paradox. And finally, a systemic pattern.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, the statutory advantage, understanding ANSA and SBA 8A.
To understand this, we have to go back to 1971. Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANSA. This was a massive piece of landmark legislation meant to extinguish Aboriginal land claims in Alaska, but it had a really unique twist for rectifying historical dispossession. Instead of setting up the traditional reservation system like we see in the lower 48, ANSA created for-profit regional and village corporations. The idea was that these would be owned entirely by Indigenous shareholders to build genuine economic self-determination.
But you know, just creating a corporation on paper doesn't mean it's going to instantly survive against established corporate giants. So to make sure these brand new entities could actually compete in the modern economy, Congress later folded them into the Small Business Administration's 8A Business Development Program. And this was a game changer. It gave Alaska Native corporations, or ANCs, some extraordinary statutory privileges that regular businesses literally just don't get.
Let's quickly break down these really powerful advantages. First up, an exemption from sole source ceilings. Normal 8A small businesses have strict caps on how big a non-competitive federal contract they can get. ANC subsidiaries, they don't. They can bypass those ceilings entirely. Second, they have incredible dominance over federal contract vehicles. This lets government agencies cut through the usual bureaucratic red tape to hand out massive task orders super fast. And third, what we call the corporate community split. Essentially, the day-to-day corporate operations are handled by massive contracting subsidiaries based out of hubs near DC or Nashville, while the financial returns flow thousands of miles back home as dividends to the Indigenous shareholders in Alaska.
This explains perfectly how an ANC subsidiary like Coniag Services could land a huge, multi-year task order from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, specifically their Enforcement and Removal Operations Division, without going through the standard, super rigorous, competitive bidding process that other companies face. The laws were explicitly designed to give them a leg up, and honestly, they're working exactly as intended.
Moving right along to Section 2, tracking unaccompanied minors, the operational scope.
The operational heart of this specific contract is built around what's known as the 287G program. If you aren't familiar with it, this program basically allows ICE to form formal, legal agreements with state and local law enforcement. It deputizes local police and sheriff's departments, handing federal immigration enforcement powers right down to the local patrol cop.
Operating out of Nashville, the National Coordination Center acts as the high-volume command post for this whole localized network. We're talking about processing thousands of inquiries every single day. It acts as a major intelligence nexus, pulling in field queries from local police along with citizen tips and instantly cross-referencing all that data against massive federal immigration repositories like the NCIC criminal database and Homeland Security watch lists. It's essentially a giant, real-time data machine.
But here is where the contract gets highly specific. According to DHS procurement records, the performance benchmarks explicitly mandate what we'll call the Miners Directive. The contract actually requires the integration of technical systems specifically built to track, locate, and report on unaccompanied alien children, or UACs. The ultimate goal here is to streamline ICE's enforcement and processing pipelines.
That brings us to Section 3, the structural paradox, a collision of worlds.
When we put these pieces together, just look at the two distinct groups involved in this dynamic. On one side, you have Alaskan Natives. This is a community that survived decades of forced assimilation, cultural suppression, and massive land dispossession, things the federal government formally acknowledged in that 1971 act. But then, on the other side of this contract, you have unaccompanied migrant children. Under the law, these minors are classified as an extremely vulnerable population, facing severe risks of exploitation, human trafficking, and serious trauma.
So what ties these two completely different groups together? Well, it's the corporate mandate. See, as a commercial entity, the Alaska Native Corporation has a strict legal fiduciary responsibility. Its number one job is to maximize financial returns for its Alutiiq and Sugpiaq owners. So really, the corporation is doing exactly what Congress mandated it to do: win federal contracts and generate wealth for its historically marginalized shareholders.
And this creates a really jarring systemic reality. When federal procurement rules channel immigration enforcement work through Indigenous-owned corporate giants, policies that were originally intended to economically uplift one historically marginalized community inadvertently become structurally entangled with the surveillance, tracking, and apprehension of another incredibly vulnerable group.
Which leads us to Section 4, a systemic pattern, zooming out.
The really crucial takeaway here is that this $63 million contract isn't just some weird anomaly. The whole overarching architecture of modern federal procurement relies on statutory preferences that function completely independently of a specific agency's mission. The legal framework that says, hey, we need to help small minority-owned businesses win contracts doesn't have a built-in filter for the human implications of the work itself. To the system, a data contract is just a data contract, whether you're tracking weather patterns or tracking human beings. As a direct result, the corporate growth and financial prosperity of Indigenous institutions can and do align seamlessly with federal enforcement strategies targeting vulnerable populations in the field. The machinery of economic justice and the machinery of state surveillance are, in this specific instance, literally turning the exact same gears.
So we're left with a pretty provocative reality to think about. If federal procurement mechanisms operate completely detached from the human impact of the work being done, how do we navigate a bureaucratic system where empowering one historically dispossessed group essentially requires surveilling another? It is a heavy structural paradox, and for sure there are no easy answers. But understanding how all these moving parts fit together, that's the very first step in examining the true nature of federal contracting and our broader bureaucratic machine. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it gives you a totally new perspective on how these federal policies collide in the real world.